Alright, everyone. Our intro first here.
Yeah.
This is the Social Factor.
Well, welcome everyone to the Social Factor. It's Josh and David.
Hello, everyone.
Stephanie is not currently here. Today we are doing Germany, which is actually where David's from.
Yay!
Now I just wanna make a few plugs, and then I just want to explain why we're doing this late.
Okay, go for it.
Get into it. Anyway, I always plug this at the beginning of every episode. Our Facebook page is facebook.com/The Social Factor Podcast, and like it. That's our Facebook page, The Social Factor Podcast. So, why are we doing this late? We're actually starting this at the point where we would be done for the day with it. We're starting it.
It's about that time, man.
Exactly. So, why exactly? Well, for the past couple weeks, my car has been making a clinking noise on the left side by the tire when you turn the like that, and I had it on my to-do list to get it to the shop to get it fixed, get it looked at and fixed and stuff like that, but I never had the time to do it. And anyway, so I had to go out to my aunt and uncle's today to help them with something. Anyway, and so I get into the driveway, and after we're finished with it, it's getting late, and body shops aren't open on Sundays anyway, so I mostly went there just to visit, and all of a sudden
You blew a tire.
I was just sitting there, and I'm looking at the front of my car, and I'm like, hey, does that side look lower to you than the other one? It was like only an inch off the ground, the front bumper was. Now, keep in mind, I do have a lowrider car. I have a Pontiac Jeep, so it is supposed to be low to the ground, but not that low.
Yeah.
So, I'm like, I should probably, get this into the shop.
Delaying this show by 45 minutes.
Anyway, yeah. So anyway, my dad is the one that usually fixes, my car and stuff like that, family cars and stuff. So I called him and asked him if he, whatever. So I was about to drive it out to the farm, and I was backing out of the driveway, and I could hear the tire rubbing up against the outer rim of the car. I'm like, oh, that's probably. I said, okay, so
Probably not a good thing.
probably not a good thing. I'm probably not going to be able to drive this anymore. But I'm like, on the way here, it wasn't doing that. All of a sudden, out of nowhere, the tire just, all of a sudden, was a big bang, and the tire just blew. So, we took the tire off, and turns out the strut must have gotten rusty. Now, keep in mind, it's 2004, and I've only had this car for about a couple months now. And anyway, the strut must have had a part on it that got rusty and decided to snap at apparently right when I got to my aunt and uncle's, because it was never that low before. So anyway, while I was driving, the strut, the part that snapped, must have dug into the wheel and popped it. So, I had planned on being back for the show by 6 o'clock. However, that delayed it to 7:45.
Yep.
So, let's get into the show. I only took 5 minutes to do that.
I'm not worried about it. You do what you need to do.
Alright, so we are going to get into Germany. And, like I said, this is David's home country. This is where David's from. David is from Offenbach, Germany, which is near Frankfurt.
Actually, the proper pronunciation is Offenbach am Main.
Yes.
Which means Offenbach on the Main River.
Exactly, and that is a small town that is just outside of Frankfurt, Germany.
Very good. You've listened to me. I like.
Oh,
that.
I know these things.
Yeah,
I know
you do.
these things. Anyway, so being that David has a lot of knowledge on this country,
So I thought.
yeah, and being that this is where he's from, David's gonna take it away with this.
All right, it's my turn. All right, hello everyone. Well, as Josh said earlier, I'm originally from Germany. Offenbach and Frankfurt are kind of like if you're from the Green Bay area in Wisconsin, it's the Schwabenau and Green Bay, so it's kind of the same thing. So that's how close it is. Now, if you look at the map of Germany today, my city is sort of like an hour away from what we know as the state of Bavaria. Okay, so it's really like southern Germany. Okay. But it's kind of closer, like you're an hour and a half away from the Alsace-Lorraine region. All right, so it's very close to like, Austria and also parts of the Alsace-Lorraine, which is a portion of France actually. So I really thought I knew my stuff about Germany until I started doing some research, and I'm like, oh my god, I know nothing about my own country. My old country, I should say, and. So what I ended up finding out was very, very interesting. Historical, there's a lot of concrete historical information that actually started in the 1st century. And the reason that it started in the 1st century is because the Romans kind of came into the area. Now, the Romans kind of tried to conquer Germania, which was actually named by Julius Caesar. Okay, so we're talking even before Jesus Christ was born.
Oh, yeah.
In the 1st century, he pretty much looked at it, and Germania, or Germania actually stands for men with spears. Okay. Now, prior to that, the Celtic people that we know today, when you think of a Celt, it's an Irish person, right? But the Celtics actually kind of were everywhere at some point, all the way into Russia. Okay. And the Celts sort of started off from what we know today as the UK, and into like parts of what we know today as Holland, and they kind of moved into the Germanic tribal region, and then into Gaul, okay, which is modern day France. So when the Romans entered France, okay, or Gaul, that was called the Gaul campaign. And they started moving inward to what we know today as Germany. They came across the Germanian tribes. And unlike any other European group at the time, they were extremely, extremely aggressive people. All right? And to the point where the Romans even had troubles with them. All right? So, come 2nd century, Caesar Augustus was on a campaign in Germania. Okay? And he was gonna rid all of that region of all the Germanian territories from the Germans.
Right.
Okay. Now, when we think of Germania, you got to think that on modern day map, you have Holland, which was part of the Germanian tribes. You had, Austria, also part of that region. All that region it was all wild, and the tribes were paganistic. Okay, they were not Christian. They converted until later on in history. Okay, but around the time of the second century, Caesar Augustus was very avid about destroying the Germanian, break the bones of the back of the Germanian tribes. What happened was just the opposite. The deeper they went into, now mind you, where I'm from, that was Roman conquered.
Right.
But as they were going north and east, they met even more resistance, stronger resistance, organized tribes. And Arminius was actually a Roman general who was, as a child, taken from a Germanic tribe. And he became key factor in one of the worst destructive acts against Rome in the history of Rome. So what happened is he kind of led them into a trap. 3 legions. Now, 3 legions is like 3 divisions. So we're talking 2,000.
Right.
I think it's 2,000 to 3,000 Roman soldiers going in deeper into the Germanian territory. And the Romans were great at fighting in open space. very well disciplined and everything else. But they were down to a single file going through these forests.
Okay.
And between the forests and the swamps, it was just difficult for the Romans to maneuver that region. And Arminius brought them right into that perfect ambush. And within one battle, 3 legions were destroyed. And to this day, they're finding bones fragments and helmet fragments and gear from that one battle still in German forests in that area. And I do forget the name of the forest, but I know it was further north from where I was from. And that actually put the Roman campaign at, like, it ceased right then and there. They couldn't form 3 more legions to make up for those.
Right.
They would have probably needed 6 more legions just to deal with the Germanian tribes. But it stopped right there and didn't go any further after that.
Okay.
Okay. So we get into this, So the Romans learned an unfortunate lesson that fighting in single files is not a good thing for them. So when you get into when you get into like German geography, there are 3 distinct borders that are that make up Germany. There's actually a 4th border that is unclear, and throughout European history it was very confusing. And it's what we know as Prussia, Eastern Europe, Eastern Germany, which would run right into Poland. Okay, often they would change hands, but the rest of Germany tend to be very stable on certain borders. And you had the Baltic in the north. That's like Serbia and Romania and Croatia and all these other areas.
Yep.
You had the Rhine in the west, which was near me. And you had the Alps, or also known as the River Danube. Okay? And those were the defining borders that made Germany what it was. Okay? So, regionally speaking, first century, the conquest of the Gaul didn't quite play out for the Romans as much as they wanted to. And you had like 2 centuries of this, or 2 generations of this. And as we go on, it was 9 AD when Arminius led the trap for the 3 legions.
Yeah.
So it was 9 AD, so 9 years after Christ was kaput, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
And so the Romans literally pulled back in shameful defeat. I'm sorry.
Okay.
They were humiliated by the Germanic tribes, but they came back later, and again, several times over, tried to conquer the northern regions of Germany.
Yep.
And often to a very costly price.
Yep.
Let's go forward in time. In the 5th century, the Germanic tribes continued to raid each other. As I said, they were very aggressive. They try to they try to conquer their neighbors, and they fight amongst themselves. And quite honestly, as far as German history goes, Germany fought with unification for many, many generations. They fought against it. They were happier with the 40 states they had, or 40 different establishments throughout Germany, and of course they turned into 13 kingdoms. Mm-hmm. And throughout history, they were one of the few nations that really defied unity and an individual identity.
Yeah.
Until the 19th century, and that would change everything.
Okay.
So, my apologies. So as time went on, Germany in the 5th century pretty much was ruled by a new class of Germanic people. Okay, and they started off as the Visigoth. These were different tribes that ended up expanding their territories. Okay, the Ostrogoth, the Burgundians, and the Franks. Okay, now the Franks were more in the French section, the Alsace-Lorraine area. The Visigoths became the... Okay, later on. They developed into a different tribe later on. Right. And the Saxons became very important, not only in German history, but also British history. Have you ever heard of an Anglo-Saxon?
Yeah, it sounds... I probably heard it from you.
They're the British. They're the British.
Okay.
The people from the island, the United Kingdom, mainly the what we know as England, those are known as the Anglos, or the Anglo-Saxons. And there's a reason why they are the Saxons as well, because the Saxons ended up sacking most of Britain.
Okay.
Okay, so why does it do this? All right, so the different groups, like they moved in vast migrations through Italy, France, and Spain. Now these are tribes.
Yeah.
So they really got around, okay? And at some point in history, France and Spain prospered, and stable parts of the Roman Empire have become almost as Romanized as Italy and so on and so forth, except Germania. They fought it to the nail.
Yeah.
Okay. Now, if you go further into history, Northern Europe, by contrast, speaks so when we talk about romanticize, they're talking about the Romanic language, the linguistic part of it. French, Spain, Italian, those are known as Romance languages, not because they're romantic,
Right.
because they come of the Roman and Latin language.
Okay.
But Germanic, totally different. And that's where everything was different. You had the German tribes, you had the Dutch, also a Germanic language. You had parts of Scandinavia using Germanic languages.
Yeah.
You had Austria using that. So that was kind of like where the cultures were different. The languages made the big difference for these designated areas.
Right.
But France fell under the spell of the Romans.
Okay.
And Italy as well. So as we go on, at some point, the Germanic tribes also brought their language to Scandinavia. Okay, the Norwegians, the Swedes, the Danes, and then of course, also in the 5th century, the Saxons emerged. And the next thing you have is the Angles, which are what we know as the original inhabitants of the British Isles.
Okay.
And then the Saxons. And now the Saxons were very effective in fighting from one side of the channel to the other. They were really good with their boats, their little ships, and they were very fighting, almost as good as the Norwegians or the Vikings were.
Right.
Okay. And of course, they took a large portion of England for the longest time, and that's because the language shifted. Because the English language, the original English language, is actually Old Germanic,
Okay.
or Old German, and then it became Old English, and then it switched off to a more modern version because it was influenced by the Norms, the Normans, which are the French, okay, and other influence like Spaniards and so on and so forth. So again, when you have history, you also got to look at the languages because it's kind of an evolution of each culture.
Right.
All right, and so by the same token, the tribes of Germany, or within the German heartland, kind of are backward. Okay, as far as it means, they were still very they were somewhat primitive still, very tribal, where you had civilization Rome, which became Italy at some point, and even other cultures. Even the Gauls were a little ahead of time when it came to ingenuity, culture, arts, and stuff. The German tribe definitely was in their elements.
Yeah.
They were forest people or swamp people. You know what I mean? And but they were a hell of a fighter and someone that you didn't want to mess with. And when you have the most powerful empire go against these tribes and they actually defeated them in a very well mastered ambush, even Rome said, "Holy crap! We've never come across someone like this before."
Right.
Because even the English, they surrendered to the Romans. What we know as England today.
Yeah.
You had France and the Gauls to just like they always do.
Oh yeah.
No offense to the French. It's like
I'm
we
part
surrender.
French.
We have.
I'm part French.
Well, so am I. I got French in me. So you have this history and this view of the Germanic tribes, which later on would continue throughout most of history.
Right.
All the way into the end of World War II. That aggression, that typical Germanic temper, and it definitely plays a large role in there, especially as you go into the future or within the boundaries of the 8th and 9th century.
Right.
And having said so, we're going to go to let's move to Charles the Great. Okay, now Charles the Great was also known as Charles Martel. Okay, now he was the son of Pepin III. Okay, and they were when you think of that, on the death of his father's on his death in 768. Okay, Charles, whose name became Charlemagne. Now, that's a very famous name in German history.
Charlemagne. That sounds familiar.
German, French, and Italian history was very, very important because he was like the Arthur of that era and of that particular region.
Right.
And from Charlemagne came like the Lombards and all these other Germanic tribes that ended up settling in Italy. And a large part was the Vatican. They were very close to the Vatican. Okay.
Right.
And in fact, Charles the Great was the only other person ever named emperor at the same time as the.
In Germany?
Yeah.
So Germany also had an emperor.
He was made an emperor by the Pope himself.
Okay.
Yeah, Leo the Third. Okay, and it was What happened is Charlemagne went to Italy, to the Vatican, and he was, and I think at that time they still had a Caesar. They still had that's what it was. It was the Eastern Empire, because by this point the Western Empire of Rome started to crumble through civil war and all this other stuff. But the rule was that only one emperor in all of the region, we're talking Europe all the way into Constantinople, which was modern day Turkey.
Yeah.
Okay. It's known as Istanbul today, but back then it was called Constantinople.
Right.
Named after the Emperor Constantine, who started the Catholic faith. All right. So he ends up being in the presence of the Pope, Leo the Third, and Leo turns and grabs the crown and puts it on Charlemagne. Completely unheard of at the time. And
Off
even
of Julius Caesar?
Yeah, not Julius. Julius was long gone by then. Julius was like in the time of Cleopatra.
Okay.
Way before Jesus ever existed. But at the time there was an emperor, I forget his name now, who was from Constantinople. He was from the Eastern Reign, the Byzantine,
right.
What they call it. So Charlemagne was shocked because he didn't expect this, and he actually at some point protested, "Hey, I know that there's only one emperor within the Catholic faith,
right?
Okay, which was the Roman emperor, okay." And the Pope says, "No, you are also an emperor of your region," and Charlemagne took it. He was the first Germanic emperor of history.
Okay.
It was a big deal because he reigned over a large portion of Spain, a large portion of France, and all of Germania.
Okay.
Into Italy, into northern Italy is where they were, and then of course he had children, so they ended up his son. After Charlemagne's death, took that region, and then his sons split the region up because they got into a big fight.
Okay.
Big inheritance issue,
Is that why they call it West and Eastern Germany?
No, please. That came from World War II, buddy.
Okay.
You're way ahead of time. All right. And I don't think we're going to cover World War II yet for a while, because we're lucky if we get this part done.
Yeah.
All right. So I kind of stepped ahead. Here's the big part, okay? Now, remember I told you about the Saxons. They derive from Saxony, okay, and surrounding area. And if I'm correct, that's northeast Germany. Okay. Modern day Germany. And they were pagans, 100%, just like the other tribes were. They even had their own religion, or they had a name and everything. They had the full gamut of ceremonies, and the whole fasting bit, and the whole popping those mushrooms and going all nuts and stuff. You know what I'm saying? And for a long time, the Roman Catholic Church was after them, wanted to convert them.
Yeah.
And so by 772 through 804, that time frame is when it took that long for them to become converted, and it was a full-out war against them.
Right.
And there was one incident where they had over 2,500 people executed within 4 days.
Okay.
Because none of them wanted to convert. So it kind of shows you a negative side of the Roman
Yeah.
Catholic faith. Okay.
Okay.
But in the end, in 804 AD, they said, okay, we're done. You've killed enough of our people,
Yeah.
you know. And so they converted
Oh.
by pressure, and that was a big deal. That change, it actually gave them to work with, and therefore, you know, the Saxon had a large influence on Great Britain. Okay, or else the British Isles, and again, it influenced an entire language.
All right.
You know, and you think about it, you know, not wanting to take too much time off here. Here you go from an old German language, and then it switched into an old English language, because then the inhabitants adapted it with their own style. You know, because some of the words are from the original inhabitants mixed with Germanic words, and then in modern history, all of a sudden you have the British move to the New World, okay, and then we have this ideology of American English.
Right.
And that is a universal language. It's like a perfection. And I know it sounds funny, but if you look at it, American English has almost every language present in its own language. Every nation, you know, it has the Spanish influence. It has the Hebrew, the Yiddish influence. It has
Right.
you have the French. You have the Dutch. You know, and still its roots is Germanic.
Right.
Okay, and yet a universal language.
Yep.
American English. I'm not
Yeah.
talking about Australian.
Oh,
I'm
I
talking
know.
about
I know.
British.
Yeah.
All right. So, you know, you know, and again, going back to Charlemagne, you know, he left a legacy behind in the north of the Alps, which was Bavaria, and you know, of course, Austria was part of that, and he was big into changing. He was a devout Catholic. You know what I mean? So he was the one who went after the Saxons, and he converted them in like a matter of 30 years. All right. And as I said, I mean, you know, from 772 through 804, they finally transformed and settled within Christianities within the empire. So Christians within the empire, and it was a very brutal process. Now, Charlemagne's method was a military conquest, just straight out, take off heads and stuff, you know.
Right.
And it was always, you know, a very aggressive. Charlemagne had a lot of horses. Okay, the Saxons didn't use horses; they were on foot.
Yeah.
Okay, so very different type of warfare. Yeah, actually 4,500 reluctant Saxons in the end, and like, I take it back, one day. That was a lot from back then, just slaughtering that many people
Right.
for not wanting to become Christian. Alright. So, in 799, I was telling you earlier, a pope is my wife. All right, sorry.
Got distracted there.
Yeah, I did. I'm sorry. So the Pope in 799 needed help from the Frankish king. Okay, and of course the Franks were the ones that were more related to the Gauls. You know what I'm saying? And Rome was physically attacked. So basically, they were under they were under attack from a pretty dangerous foe, and it was Leo III that called upon Charlemagne to rescue them. Okay, so they were pretty much under siege. Let's see. Oh yeah, I already told you about this. This is pretty cool stuff. All right, so now I was actually very, very, very intrigued by this portion of the German history, which I had no idea about. So Aachen in 805. Aachen is a city which was like maybe 25 to 30 minutes north of me. Okay, so a lot of this played out in like regions of Hessen and Schwäbisch Hall, you know, the Schwabenland they call it, which is like northwest, I think, of where I was. Pretty much, they were the first one to create the first German cathedral, Catholic cathedral. Okay, and it was all in Latin. It was called Aix la Chapelle. Okay, and Actually, that sounds French, but it's actually Latin. And so it took him 5 years to build this spectacular, for the time. It was spectacular for Leo the Third because he was as I said, he was the Pope. He came to the was it when you open a place that's like a church or something? It's like what's that called? The ceremony for it.
What? When you open a place that's a church.
Yeah, well, like a cathedral. He was a christening, almost like that. It was like a christening.
I was going to say, dude, a cathedral is the head of a diocese. The church. A church is like...
A cathedral is a building.
Right, but a cathedral marks the church of the diocese.
It's the hub with the spokes going out from like the little churches.
Right, exactly.
So, correct. But this was the first one in German history.
Yeah.
Okay, and that happened in 805 AD. Okay, so it took. I'm sorry. The Aix-la-Chapelle is actually a French name of Aachen, so it's an interpretation, which I said. And yeah, I'm getting very specific, and that's why I'm kind of lost in all this. But this was sort of Charlemagne's way of showing the church that he was a faithful servant, and also the emperor, as he was. Aachen being what it is, and this was kind of a significant part of Catholic history as well. Opened that place up, and it was like a beginning of a new era.
Okay.
For that region. Okay. All right. So in between 780 and 814 AD, clergy started getting more power, and they started spreading throughout Germany, because there was still quite a bit of. There was still further north. There were still tribes that didn't get the memo. Okay. And so they became missionaries. They're going to move outwardly, and it also looks like they were also focusing on Britain. So I guess for the longest time, Britain wasn't. They were more pagan than anything else, just like the Saxons were. Okay, so I mean we can continue talking about just basically. The 9th century, the 10th century, and the 11th century basically was a buildup of Catholic influence throughout Germany, and of course Charlemagne, as I said, had children, had one son, actually had 3 sons, and 2 of them died, and he ended up when he died, the one son inherited it, and then he had 3 children, and it had to be sons, it's always been the boys, and when it came after. His son's Charlemagne's son's death, then that's where the strife started. The siblings fought under each other. A real fight. We're talking. They had their own little armies and they're fighting each other, and they ended up splitting a lot of Europe because it was Charlemagne conquered so much and had so much control over it. It was blessed by the Roman Catholic Church to continue that control. You understand what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
And so his sons did that, and it became, like 3 different regions. All right. And as you move throughout history, then you have the introduction of the Black Plague, which was in the late 1200s, early 1300s, and that kind of decimated throughout Europe. It decimated, I think it was 75% of the population.
Okay.
Of all the human population, and that left a hole. And so you had vandals, and you had a lot of survivors who were taking advantage of the weak type stuff, and then after a while the regions started becoming stable again. They started having backup. They had sort of a government that was running the show and stuff, and the church was the biggest contributor to getting control.
Right.
And after that, the church, even in Germany, especially in Germany, after that the church really got a lot of power. Especially after the Black Plague, the first one. There was a total of 3 different plagues throughout the Middle Ages. And it all started with trade, with the Orient. Was like the different Arab nations, and then going to Asia and stuff. That's where all this stuff came from, the disease. It's called a bubonic plague, okay? Also known as the Black Death. And once it inhabited Europe, it's like it was there. It never went away. You know?
Right.
And throughout the different centuries, actually, once in a while it showed its face, and when it did, it was devastating. So, having said that, in the 13th century, a monk by the name of Martin Luther showed up. Okay, and what happened was he was a monk or a priest kind of thing, but a monk, like, he's really into vows, you know. And I never quite understood the difference. I guess a priest wore a different gown, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
But a monk, I guess, was more committed, and he became very disenfranchised with the Catholic Church because he saw a lot of the corruption. He saw a lot of the hypocrisy behind the church itself, and he pretty much started his own religion. And today we call that the Lutheran Church. Okay.
And we're talking about Martin Luther.
Yeah. Continue talking. I gotta take.
Okay. Martin Luther. He was actually, like David said, he was the founder of the Lutheran Church. Sorry, David went to take a call. His wife keeps calling him. But anyway, I'm going to basically talk as much as I can because David did most of the research on this because I did not have the time because of my little incident there. David is now back.
I'm back, sorry.
Thank God, because I didn't really know what to say.
Yeah, well, again, Martin Luther became a reformist. And it took a few hundred years, but Germany, I mean, even today, is it predominantly Lutheran. You know, it used to, like, for instance, my grandmother, she wasn't Lutheran. She was actually Catholic because her father was a Catholic. And being from raised by Bavarians, which the state of Bavaria is right below where we're from, and they've always been Catholic. It's like over the never converted to Lutheran. But the rest of Germany, like going up all the way to former East Germany, was predominantly Lutheran. Okay, and he just changed. While a lot of the stuff is pretty similar to the Catholic Church as far as the Bible and stuff that he wrote. Or he rewrote, okay. He made some changes, and it was supposed to be focused on pious and purity, okay. He was really like anti-corruption. He was really anti, hypocrisy, and so, as I said, it took a few hundred years for it to get where it became a predominant region of Germany who were Lutherans. But this also caused a big problem for the individual states that were Lutheran in trading with Spain, France, and all these other European, like even Holland, for the longest time was Catholic.
Yeah.
Okay? And then they converted. In fact, I believe the Dutch became Quakers for a little while. And there was another group, I forget the name, and we'll get to that another time. But as far as looking from a religious point of view, again, religion was politics as well. Throughout all of Europe and later on in the United States as well, Africa and all these other regions.
Religion is still politics.
It is, and it's unfortunate. And as I said, Martin Luther, the majority of the Bible that he wrote...
The two most things argued about these days in modern society, religion and politics.
And they go hand in hand. It's unfortunate. But yeah, what I was saying is that... Now I forgot what I was saying.
Sorry.
You interrupted me. Okay. So let's move on. Okay, so you have the 13th century, and then there was the Renaissance era, and it started in Italy, in Florence actually, I think, and then it kind of maneuvered outward, and it also went to Germany. You know. Now remember, when I speak of Germany, at this point I'm only talking about the bordering areas. You know, like I described earlier. Germany was at its lowest 40 different type of principalities. Okay, and they had their own little royalty and their own courts, and and no one could agree. I mean, it's like they were basically tribes for close to until the 19th century.
Yeah.
They became kingdoms at some point where they agreed. They would like certain principalities or families would agree. Okay, let's ally with these guys for the time being because we got this threat from this other group. Okay.
Right.
other group of German principalities. Okay, and so you'd have this mishmash of all these different groups of principalities or kingdoms, and it sort of caused problems because they were very weak, and outside influences, outside sources such as the French and even the Dutch would come in sometimes, and they have the same problems like the Germans. The Dutch and Germans are pretty much Germans. I hate to say that. The language is a little different, but from genetically, we're brothers. Just like the Austrians, the Germans and Austrians are brothers because they're cousins. Just like the Dutch are cousins to the Germans, I should say, and so it caused a lot of problems for the individual principalities. Bavaria, believe it or not, stronger than most of the other ones, and Prussia. Now, Prussia was northeast region, okay? Prussia was a large influence overall on Germany, especially from like the 1600s on. And when it got to the time of Napoleon in 1815, okay, Prussia would save the day. Because it was England and Napoleon were fighting. Okay? And mind you, Napoleon actually conquered most of central to South Germany. Frankfurt and Offenbach was under Napoleonic rule for, I think, 10 years or so. Yeah. And was forced to speak French. So Napoleon, he was an aggressor, just like good old Adolf, basically, I mean, I'm giving you the outline, giving you individual history because there's so much more to Germany than I'm telling you right now. But ultimately,
now we got 2 minutes left.
Yeah. Ultimately, I think we're going to stop at the Napoleonic Wars.
That will do part 2 next week.
And I might go back next week and just kind of.
Most countries will have part 2. A select few will have part 3.
Yeah. So, long story short, as far as Napoleon's influence on Germany, he was a conqueror. He took a large section, including my community, in the early 1800s, and conquered it, and he ruled it. And the French army was there.
Yeah.
Okay. And you can in the movie Brothers Grimm, if you ever get that chance to watch it, that's actually outside of Aachen.
Okay.
Where the story takes place, and and you can see like in one section, and I watched it like, oh, scheiße, this is cool because it's my old city.
Oh, you mean like we're like saying like words.
When he went into the crossing, into like the fortified city.
Where the scene is supposed to be taking place.
Yep, and it was Frankfurt, and it was already called Frankfurt.
And did you recognize like some areas?
No, that area was number one, it was more of a movie thing, and number two, 1805 and 1815. Okay?
Right.
So definitely not. None of that exists. I mean, everything was rebuilt. Yeah. The French ended up getting their butts kicked. Okay. And they left that region, went back, especially when Napoleon was done. Alright, so we're going to stop with Napoleon. And I know I went through like a lot of centuries. Next week I'm going to be a little more specific, and I might go back a little more.
Next week we'll be back with part 2 of Germany.
Yay!
Alright.
Alright, you guys have a good night.
You guys have a great night.